I'll just do a quick welcome, Becky, and turn it over to you. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I'm with Virginia Community Capital, and it's a pleasure to partner with this group to present this program to small businesses and entrepreneurs in Virginia to help to kind of refocus and rebuild after the COVID-19. And this is one of my favorite topics, talking about IT. And I'll let Becky share more, but I just want to give you some housekeeping things. We are recording this session for education and training purposes only, and that will be available to view on the Virginia Community Capital's Facebook and YouTube channels, and I'm sure our friends at the Small Business Development Centers will be sharing. So great content, and I know you're going to enjoy your speaker today. So I'm going to turn it over to Becky Oquin at the Mountain Empire Small Business Development Center. Becky, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Sandy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I, along with my SBDC partners here in Southwest Virginia, want to welcome you. We provide free, confidential one-on-one counseling for startups and existing businesses and education and training opportunities. So you're welcome to reach out to us, as well as alongside of Courtney Connor with UVA Wise. So thank you for joining us today. You know, the pandemic left businesses with no option but to switch to online working for what was thought to be a short-term solution. However, this gave businesses some real-time data on the positive results of online working. And in 2021, now businesses are considering what their new options or new operations will be going forward. And many of those businesses are looking at either allowing employees to remain at home for remote working or a hybrid option. So today we have Jonathan Evenden, president and founder of Aegis IT Solutions, who will present on how to set up work from home long term. Aegis is located in Kingsport, Tennessee, and Jonathan started Aegis in 2012, and he's been in the IT industry full-time since 2004. In the rare moments he's not in front of the computer, he's playing board games and watching Netflix with his wife and his son. So Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent, thank you. As I like to say, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary solution. And I think COVID has really, the temporary work from home and all the temporary measures have rapidly approached permanent status. Well, we'll see. Anyway, today we're going to be discussing considerations for remote office work. Basically, we want to look at how to make a good setup for having your staff work from home. This will depend largely on your industry, as well as what type of work your employees do. For example, if you're in manufacturing and you have a bunch of plant floor workers, that's obviously not going to work so well. They're going to have to be there manning the machines and functioning right then and there to be able to feed the materials and whatever else factors into the factory. So that's not a position that's really going to work. But those office staff might have a great opportunity to work from home. So just real quick, by way of introduction, I have been fixing computers since, I guess, the mid-90s. My dad brought home a computer in the late 80s, and I was very interested in it. And it's basically a passion and a hobby for me. I absolutely love them. Started doing full-time enterprise IT in 2005. My first job was not in enterprise. Basically a step down, but yeah, 2004 was when I got into it full-time. 2005 was when I transitioned into enterprise. So I've been at this for 16 years, and then started Aegis IT in 2012. It had been a dream and a passion and a desire to run my own company for quite some time. At Aegis IT, we provide hardware and software support. We sell computers, we set up computers, we set up software. We provide managed IT services. This is managed antivirus. We manage backups, remote access, patch management. And we also do a considerable amount of disaster recovery planning and prevention. And the big topic for the past year has been setting up staff to work from home. We've done a large amount of that, and there's all sorts of different ways to do that, of which we will discuss. So overview for the presentation. One of the first considerations is how to actually set up your remote staff. So this would be considerations such as Are you going to provide them a company computer, or are you going to expect them to use their home computer? And there's actually quite a few implications between those two, and we'll get into that a bit. We've done it both ways. You'll see that I strongly recommend and prefer using company equipment versus relying on staff home equipment, and I'll explain why that's the case. Phone systems are also pretty key when you're in your office. If you're like me, I spend a lot of time on the phone. I checked my phone records, and I pretty well average between 2,000 to 3,000 minutes a month on the phone. Sometimes it's up to 4. It just depends on the month and how many calls we get. So phone system is pretty important for a large number of companies these days. Also remote access. So if you're working from home, you need to be able to access your company information, your company files. You need to be able to access your line of business software, whether it's QuickBooks or some other CRM platform. And so those are all important considerations from technology, from security, from personnel. They're very important to be able to plan in advance before you just send someone home and say, hey, connect using LogMeIn. Then we'll also talk about how to remotely track staff. And what I mean by that is we're going to be looking at a couple of solutions related to tracking time. We're going to be looking at tracking activity, meaning what are they doing during that time? And then also project trackers, meaning how's everything working together? Is this person working too much and this person's doesn't have enough on their plate? How do you load balance your projects, and how do you make sure that everyone is working an appropriate amount of time on these projects? So these will range in terms of how much they cost. They will range in terms of, does it require software that you install on the computer, or is it just something that they enter? It really just depends on the solution, and we'll see that there's a good amount of overlap between the different solutions. So let's talk about considerations for remote staff setup. So the first question we typically get when someone says that they need to work from home is, do the remote staff use their home computer, or do I need to get them a computer? My typical answer is, please get them a company computer. Some of the reasons why is it's a question of compliance. Do you have an acceptable use policy for your computers? Meaning, what you do on your home computer might be different than what you do on your work computer. What you do on your home computer might be acceptable, and it might not be so acceptable on your work computer. I'll leave that to your imagination. We've cleaned a lot of computers over the years, and I've found a lot of interesting things. So you have some control over what they do from a compliance standpoint if you have an acceptable use policy, and that does not apply to their home computer. Question of security. Is it safe to let them connect to your network? So if you've got a home computer, especially if it's shared by other people in the family, and especially if other people come over and use that computer, you have no idea what's running on that computer. You have no idea if their antivirus is up to date or if it's even installed. You have no idea if they're using it to go to couponclicker.com or couponprinter.com, and it's tracking everything that's happening on the computer, because that's how couponprinter.com works. You don't know if they've got malware. You don't know if they've got a virus that's been on there for 3 years that's never been cleaned off. You just don't know. It is highly unsecure to allow home computers to connect to the network for the most part. I can think of a couple situations where it's okay. We have one client where they use their home computers, but we have all of our software, all of our security software on their home computers. That's the one case where I'm okay with them connecting, because we have full management and full visibility into those home computers. Question of legality. So one of the tracking software solutions, or I should say some of the tracking software solutions, require installing software on the computer in order to be able to track what the staff is doing. Can you legally do that if it's not a company computer? That's a great question. And I'm not an attorney, and I'm not prepared to answer that for you. That would be a good question for an attorney. But it's a good question that needs to be addressed, because if it's we'll see on the next slide, if it's a company computer, it's not a problem. You can basically do whatever you want to on a company provided computer. But if it's a home computer, that's a much bigger issue, and you could actually run into problems, especially if you're installing software that tracks all of their, say, keystrokes, and you start getting into very personal information that is obviously not company related. Then it's also a question of policy. What happens to the tracking during non-working hours? So obviously if they're working on their home computer, you want to make sure that they're working, but then what happens after hours? Are you going to continue to track what they're doing even when they're on their free time? Are you going to be tracking what they're doing when their kids are on it, when the husband or wife is on it, or someone else comes over and uses it, and it ends up opening a large number of problems depending on who's doing what on the home computer. So continuing the question, in contrast, so the way that I answer these questions basically is with company equipment, there's really no expectation of employee privacy. Once again, I'm not an attorney and I'm very much not your attorney. So be sure to check your local laws. But from my understanding of the law, at least in terms of how I've interacted with it in the federal level and what I've looked into the state, there really is no expectation of employee privacy. So you can track whatever you want to, you can record whatever you want to. If someone is using a work computer for personal information and the information gets leaked, they're going to have a pretty hard case to make that this was this was a violation, because it's on a company provided computer. And once again, there's really no expectation. As always, I'm not an attorney. Check with an attorney. With company equipment, there is no room for employees to object to policy, meaning if it's your home computer, you probably don't want your boss installing something that tracks everything you do on it. But if it's a company computer, what are they going to object to? There's really nothing to object to, because it's a company computer and you have the right to install basically whatever you want to, especially since it's for monitoring work purposes. So you bypass the policy question because you set the policy as long as it's your equipment. And then also with company equipment, you can ensure that the hardware will run whatever you want to. We've encountered this in a number of places where someone will go to Sam's Club and they buy a random laptop or desktop, and then they'll go to Walmart and then someone's ordered something from Amazon and someone's gotten a recycled computer, and you have this crazy mix up in terms of what equipment is in play and how old the equipment is. And this computer is running a version of Windows 10 that hasn't been updated in 2 years. And so it's on a different version number of Windows 10 than everything else, and it doesn't quite work right. When you are providing the equipment, you have the opportunity to make sure that the hardware is the same and that it's going to work with your systems. Whereas when people say, I want to connect from home using my home computer, you really have no idea what you're walking into until you actually get on the computer and check out the system. So in case it's not clear, I highly recommend that the company provide equipment. Yes, it's more expensive, but you will save yourself a lot of time and money, especially if someone's got a home computer that's got a virus and now it's connected to your network. That's a real problem. All right, so let's talk about phones. Many remote staff need to communicate by phone. We still, even with all the texting, even with all the social media, even with email, phone is still just a massive way that people communicate with each other. I could look at my phone right now and it's 12 o'clock or give or take, and I've probably been on the phone 20 times already this morning. We just deal with phone calls quite a bit. So being able to handle staff working remotely is immensely difficult if you have a traditional on-site phone system. So if it was 20, 30 years ago and you've got that big phone box that's sitting on the wall, you're going to have a very hard time, if not even being possible, to allow staff to make phone calls from outside of the work. So we have actually transitioned a large number of clients away from the traditional on-site PBX because it makes it very difficult for them to communicate when they're home. So this is incredibly easy in contrast with a voice over IP phone system. So with voice over IP, my phone, if I need to work from home, I can take my phone, unplug it, take it home, plug it up, and it works. And it's just like I'm in the office, the exact same phone number, my extension works exactly the same. Voicemail works exactly the same. Inter-office dialing works exactly the same. The phone doesn't care where you're physically located as long as you have internet. And that's what has been a huge demand for remote staff, especially in COVID. I also, with my phone vendor, I have an app on my cell phone where I can make phone calls straight from my cell phone. I don't even need a desk phone. I can be on the road. I can be in the car. Don't listen to that if you're my insurance agent. I can be pretty much anywhere as long as I have cell signal or wireless and make phone calls. And that's not possible with the old style traditional phone system. So does your phone system give you call analytics? Do you have the means of being able to track who's on the phone? If someone is supposed to be handling the phones all day and you see that they have handled 4 phone calls and they should have had, 30, 40, 50, well, then you've got a problem. Alternatively, if someone's handled 400 phone calls in one day, maybe you need to hire another person. I don't know. It depends on the types of phone calls you're getting, but you won't know either unless you have some sort of phone call analytics. If staff are working from home, you really need to be able to see who is and is not on the phone. It's real easy. I should say it's considerably easier when everyone's in the same office to know if someone's there, or if someone's on the phone, or someone stepped away from their desk. Whereas if you've got staff that are scattered all over the place, you really just have no way of knowing. And so if you've got the ability to have some indication as to whether someone's there or not, that will save you time and hassle trying to track someone down. Also, easy way to transfer calls in and out of the office. Once again, traditional phone system, it's just really not that possible. Voice over IP is just a regular transfer because the phone doesn't care where it's located. And then also an easy way for the staff to make calls with or without a physical phone, meaning I've got a couple of desk phones sitting behind me. We use them for demonstration purposes, but I'm just as capable of making phone calls from my cell phone. I can make phone calls from my computer. All I need is a headset. I can make phone calls from an iPad, and they will all show up in the same place. They will all show up in my call history. They will show the duration. It doesn't matter where I'm logging in from. Everything looks exactly the same. And that has been absolutely fantastic, especially as we set people up for working remotely. All right, let's talk about remote access. So some of these are going to be dependent on you and your environment. It is what systems are you using and how are you set up? Do you have physical servers in your office? Are you all on a cloud-based system for your software? But in general, typical things that we take into consideration is line of business software, such as QuickBooks. QuickBooks Online has made this easier, for example, to work remotely because now people just have to go to a website. They don't have to log into a physical server that's running QuickBooks Desktop. I have a lot to say about QuickBooks Online. Not much of it is very positive. It's not just because I'm biased against QuickBooks Desktop. It's extremely expensive, and the platform is just not as good as QuickBooks Desktop. Plus, you lose all these integrations and third-party factors that you have the ability to work with in Desktop. So, but I'm not an unbiased source, to take that with a grain of salt. You also have things such as your CRM or sales software. Think of a Salesforce. Salesforce is online. You can access that anywhere. So that's a pretty easy one if you're using something like Salesforce. However, we deal with plenty of clients that have an on-site, on-premise CRM or sales system. It used to be something like an Act back in the day. That was popular 10, 15, 20 years ago, Act database. Whereas that has mostly transitioned to the cloud, but we still see things online or on premise. You also have industry specific software, maybe your dental practice using a particular dental package. Maybe it's financial manager using specific financial software. We see a wide range of specific industry specific software and that type of software. So, and also have important files that need to be shared with other staff members. A lot of people switch to things like Dropbox or OneDrive or Box.com. There are solutions for being able to share files. However, we also have plenty of clients that are not comfortable putting their files out there, or Dropbox is expensive. For example, we've got a client that spends 5 figures on Dropbox every year because of how many people are on the platform and how much access they need. So we're currently trying to figure out how we can save them money by moving that in-house, and there's just some different options that we're looking at for them with that. So The point is that something like Dropbox is easy because it's also in the cloud, while if you've got a large server that has your core files, then you need to have some sort of remote access to be able to have staff access those files. And there's great reasons for having it either way. All right, so let's talk about how you can actually connect. So now that you know what you need your staff to work on, the question is, which of the multiple ways do you want to connect them? So we deal with this a decent amount, VPN connections. So that typically requires having a device that can handle the VPN connection and paying for licensing. So maybe it's a Cisco firewall or SonicWall firewall or some other VPN device. You basically have to be able to pay for hardware. You're going to pay extra for a static IP address from your internet provider. You're going to need to pay for the licenses in order to be able to connect your end users. Then you're going to need to have someone set it up and support you and all the other various and sundry issues that go along with it. So it works great. The VPN provides a private connection between your computer and the main office. The computer doesn't know the difference between it being inside the office and it being outside the office, and all that information that goes back and forth is secure. So you'll see, if you spend any amount of time on YouTube, you'll see companies like NordVPN or any other VPN services. They're gearing towards residential clients to secure traffic. This is specific for connecting to the business, and you would need to use something specifically tailored towards commercial VPN. Another option that we set up regularly, actually one thing I was just doing for a client this morning, is remote desktop. Microsoft calls it terminal server. This requires a server and you have to pay for the licensing. So you need to have a server that has enough hardware to accommodate however many users. Then you also have to be able to pay for the licensing to be able to have as many users as you need. Once again, you're going to need to pay somebody to set that up, or if you know how to set that up yourself. And there's support costs and there's hardware costs, and then there's software costs as well. So the advantage of this is you set it up once, and it's going to be the same thing for everybody. So we've got some clients that use remote desktop, and so what ends up happening is I set up the server once, I install all the applications that they need, and then when someone new joins, all I have to do is assign that new person permission to remotely connect, and that's it. Everything's already there. It's all done. I don't have to sit there and mess around with anything extra. It's extremely convenient for me as the administrator to do that. The licensing and hardware requirements depend on how many people, as well as what software you intend to run. I happen to like remote desktop a lot, but there are other considerations such as security that you might want to have on top of this. So for example, for one client, we have both of these. They have to connect on the VPN first, and then they can remote desktop to the server. And that's actually a great way to do that, because you have all the security that comes from a VPN, and then you have remote desktop. So that means it reduces my system management and overhead. So you can mix and match these options. And then finally, another common option is remote access to desktops in the office. So one of the services that we offer is remote support. And so we install software that allows us to remotely connect to our clients to provide support. Well, it just so happens that exact same software and platform can be used for staff who want to work from home. So it's not uncommon for a business owner or an office manager to need to access their work computer from home to be able to pull up stuff after hours or on a snow day, or if there's some other issue. And so we're able to set that up at there's no extra cost if you're already paying us for it. Other common solutions are, say, a LogMeIn or a Splashtop or a TeamViewer. And they all have their advantages and disadvantages. LogMeIn is extremely expensive compared to what it was 10 years ago. Like very, very expensive. They've really raised their prices in a bad way. And so the disadvantage to this is you have to have an individual desktop in the office for whoever's trying to connect. And it's a one-to-one relationship. Remote desktop, you could have 100 people working from the same single server if you needed to, and if you had the hardware for it. Remote desktop, if you need 100 people, remote access to desktops, if you had 100 people, you would need 100 desktops. And In a lot of cases, the desktops are already there. People are basically accessing their work computers. So they're going into the office, they sit down at their desktop and they work, and then they go home and they connect back to that desktop. And so it's got all their Outlook set up and all their files and their favorites and their shortcuts. So everything's already there, and it provides a consistent experience for the staff that way. And we find that there's a lot of people that really enjoy that, or they prefer that, because now everything looks the same. It's not like it's not like the environment is different when they log into remote desktop on the server that way. So yeah, we can mix and match. We set up clients with multiple of these, and some of it just depends on client preference as to which way they want to connect, as well as budgeting. And finally, this is not really remote access, but you still can factor it in. Web-based programs, so anything on the cloud. So I mentioned sales, so you got Salesforce, QuickBooks Online. There's nothing particularly special that needs to be done to set up these applications online, because you just go to salesforce.com and you log in. Everything's right there. So as long as you have internet access, these programs will work. And I would say we have clients that set up these types of platforms because they can work from anywhere. For example, what I do for some of my accounting and time tracking, I set up the way I did because I wanted to be able to put in my time and track my time and log all my time, even if I'm not in front of a computer. So if I'd used QuickBooks desktop version, for example, I would be tied to either having to remotely connect to that computer all the time or be in front of the computer to put all my time in. Whereas now because it's web-based application, we can just all my staff can just log their time. I can do invoices and expenses just on the road, and it's great. So let's talk about tracking staff. And I'm going to talk about some specific ideology considerations, as well as I will have a list of software. For the list of software or a list of options, I'm just going to throw them all up on the screen. Since this is being recorded, you can always go back and look at it later. I'm not going to talk about each individual one, but they're there just as example pieces of software. There's any number, dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of vendors that will meet these particular needs. So I just picked 5 or 6. All right, so the biggest issue with staff working remotely is accountability. Meaning, are the staff actually working, or are they just watching YouTube all day? That's a big consideration. If we have clients calling us because they're concerned that staff are on Facebook in the office, what do you think is going to happen when they're working from home? It really does become an issue of being able to see who's doing what and how long and how much time they're spending on these activities. So additionally, are they completing tasks in a timely manner? Are you able to measure how long it takes to, say, reply to an email, or how long it takes to, say, run invoices or respond to this support ticket, maybe in our case, or any number of factors that your individual business would want to track? Do you have the ability to keep track of that? All the tools that I mentioned are cloud-based. That's just easier. That's the direction the industry is heading. The vendors like it because now they're getting money every month, and they don't have to worry about installing software directly on your computers. Some of these platforms do require software agents to be installed on the computer. This is mostly for tracking activity. We're talking about software that keeps track of screenshots, that I guess can track keylogger, keystroke logging if you wanted to. I didn't put any of those solutions on that list, but you can keep track of how much time they spent in Word, how much time they spent in Firefox, how much time they spent in Chrome, how much time they spent in, and the way that it does that is because they install an agent on the computers. And then you'll also find that if you go to the websites, many of these vendors overlap in features. So I basically picked the primary function for each of these vendors and put them down under that category. You could potentially use one of these vendors for all three of these categories if you found the right one. All right, so let's talk about tracking the time of staff. And so the question to answer here is, how are your remote staff using their time? And it is if you are not like us. So our business model is that we bill by our service time. So we're very much like a legal firm in that regard, because we keep track of how much time we spend on a particular support task or project or however, whatever we're working on. It's all time based. And so tracking our time is extremely important. And it's the same way with law firms or other consulting industries. But if you're in manufacturing, for example, and you have office staff that are managing projects or salespeople that are doing sales, you're not billing by the hour, but it's still a fantastic metric that you can use to judge productivity. It's not the only metric, but it's a great place to start. You'll find people that will figure out how to waste time no matter where they are. I can't help that. But when someone is physically there, when the boss is physically present, that typically is less of an issue, sort of like when the cat's away, the mice will play kind of deal. So what ends up happening is when everyone's working remotely, there's no boss right there. And so there's greater opportunity, greater temptation to not be productive, shall we say. And so you've got these various platforms that will help track this data. And you've got accountability for the staff that you no longer see all day. When it comes to the vendors that I'm mentioning, I don't necessarily have direct interaction with any of these. These are not necessarily platforms that I've personally used, although some of them I have. So this would be a good, I'm just trying to throw out as many names and vendors as possible and let you look at the ones that maybe pique your interest and go through and look at the platforms more in detail. This also will be dependent on your particular industry and which vendor is a good fit for you. So I'm just going to throw these up there. Time tracking, you've got Rescue Time, you got Harvest, Time Doctor, Time Camp. I think at least one of these was free to get started, and you can track, like 2 or 3 people. Most of them have a paid module. I mean, that's how they get paid. So by all means, go check these out. See if any of these will work for you. Of course, there's going to be overlap in some of the other solutions in terms of what they do and what features they offer. Okay, so let's talk about activity. So when it comes to tracking activity, you can see, for example, that your staff spent X amount of hours on this particular item. That's what the time tracking will tell you. But what did they get done in that time? That's what tracking activity wants to help you answer. If it takes someone an hour to complete an email, I mean, it doesn't have to be a doctoral thesis, but if it takes an hour and it's only 2 sentences, that probably wasn't a great use of time. I mean, maybe they took a whole bunch of time to research those 2 sentences or come up with some numbers related to those 2 sentences, but there would be ideally more than 2 sentences if it took an hour. So the activity, the activity is really there to see what's the level of productivity. If now that you know how much time they spent, what do they get done? So if you've got, on the other hand, if you've given them 8 hours of training and they get it done in 30 minutes, that's probably not great in the other direction. So in the first one, you got them spending too much time on a simple task. And the other one, they're not spending enough time. And the only way you're going to be able to know that is if you're tracking the activity that they're doing on that time. So you can have time tracking to help you know that a staff spent hours, it's supposed to be hours, not fours, spent hours on invoices, but how many invoices did they work on? Was that number acceptable? So that's going to be a question that you'll need to establish, what metrics are okay, how much activity needs to get done in this time frame. For example, when it comes to our work, we have a number of tasks that are pretty common. We get requests to do the same thing on a pretty regular basis. And I have a decent idea of how long that particular task should reasonably take. There's always exceptions and there's always weird issues that will come up. But if you come to me and say, hey, I need a new computer, I have a pretty good idea of how long it's going to take to get that set up and what we're going to need to do. If one of my staff members takes 10 hours and it should take about 2, 3, 4, maybe something along those lines, then I'm going to be wondering what happened. Was there an issue? Does this person need training, for example? That would be an opportunity to point out that they need to be better trained on this particular task. Or if it's supposed to take 4 hours and they get done in 20 minutes, I'm going to be questioning how many steps did they skip to get to that point. And that's where tracking the activity is going to be helpful to be able to know what's actually happening. Now, what's important to note is that these are the vendors that will install software. These are the ones that are going to have an agent that's running on the computer that keeps track of how long you're spending in Word and PowerPoint and on the web and all that. So the first one specifically manages email. It gives you information as to how long it took to reply to email and how many emails this person sent. That's a bit more niche. The rest of them will monitor the whole computer. So once again, this does come back to a question of policy and legality. Just make sure that if you're going to install something like this, that it's on company equipment, because you could potentially run into serious issues if you put it on a home computer. But as I said, I'm not an attorney, and I'm definitely not your attorney. So projects and tasks. How are your overall projects being managed? Basically, how do you know if your tasks and subtasks are being addressed? Is the workload properly balanced among the staff? Maybe you've got one person that needs 10 to 15 hours a day to get everything done, and you've got another person who's having a hard time coming up with 2 to 3 hours of work a day. There's obviously an imbalance in that situation. And ideally, software that allows you to track your projects and your tasks will help you see that, oh, this person is working way too much. This person has these 30 tasks that they need to get done. This other person only has 3 and he's waiting on responses on 2. So this will help you with big picture items. These will help you with understanding who is doing what, and you would combine them with activity and time tracking to be able to put together where you are. Because if you know that someone is spending 4 hours on this task because you're keeping track of their time, and you know that they've been pretty productive in that 4 hours because you're keeping track of their activity, where does that 4 hours fit into the overall project and tasks? Was it a good use of 4 hours? If this other decision had been made over here, could that 4 hours really have only required 2 hours? You don't know, unless you're able to fit all the puzzle pieces together in a broader picture. I actually use Asana with one of my nonprofits. It's been a long time since I've used Basecamp, but it's earned a great reputation, and there's a reason for that. The others I don't have personal experience with, but they are great for making sure that you're doing what you need to do. You can set them to remind you every day about all the things that you've not done. That's always fun. That alert was like the first thing I turned off. So yeah, and you'll find something like a Basecamp. It would probably be capable of doing time tracking and activity tracking. I mean, you're going to get overlap between these vendors. So basically what I want you to take away from this is that working from home requires thought and planning. It's not just go work from home and here's your remote access. There are people that will do that, and you're setting yourself up for big problems later on. COVID has dramatically increased the need for staff to work from home. One of the annoying side effects to that is it has been virtually impossible to find laptops. We just can't find laptops. They're constantly on back order, or it's a 30, 60, 90 day shipping delay if I buy them brand new. And part of that's because all the students are doing classes from home and tons of employees are working from home. So, as well as a reduction in the overall supply chain. Desktops we've had no issues with. They've been pretty consistent, but laptops they stopped existing. And if you can find them, the price is 25, 30, 40% higher than they were prior to COVID. So that's an unexpected, or that's been a painful side effect to people working from home. That's also something that needs to be planned for. So basically, solutions abound. There are so many different software platforms. I just picked 5 in each category to allow you remote access, remote communications, and remote tracking, you have no lack of option to be able to get the information that you want and need to be able to manage your staff remotely. And then basically having a uniform setup for staff and solid support team will help you have a good remote access and good remote staff working. So that's what I've got prepared. What questions might you guys have?
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I do have a few questions.
Go for it.
In reference to phones and voice over ID, do you just need a Wi-Fi or Ethernet connection, or did you say you need to plug it in an outlet?
Great question. Most of the phones that if you have a hard phone that's voice over IP, it will need an Ethernet cable. Now, if you've got what's called a soft phone, which is basically software based, like what I have on my cell phone or what I have on my iPad or through a computer, then that doesn't need anything more than one of those devices. One of our clients, they don't have any desk phones. They set up everyone with headsets, and they all go through what's called a soft phone. So everyone just uses the headsets on their computer, and they make all the phone calls through the computer.
Is a virtual desktop the same as a remote desktop?
Yes, with a big asterisk. So the technical term is VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. And it's essentially a virtual machine, like it's a virtual desktop that you set up, like it's set up in the same location. So Microsoft lets you deploy virtual desktops in the same places they let you deploy remote desktop. There's a different underlying technology. It's different. It's licensed differently, but it's close enough to. They're not exactly the same, but it's close. Meaning you're going to be working in the same location. Now, in those, you have to prep the images. Like there's different prep work related to VDI versus just straight up terminal services. And VDI, they have different advantages and disadvantages to both. We mostly deploy terminal services for the hardware resources and just other reasons. That just works out better for our particular clients. But one of my friends, for example, his current issue is he's got a VDI deployment with I don't know, what do you say, 11,000 computers, and so he's got an issue with the base image, and now it's not just one computer. He's got to fix this problem that affects 11,000 computers. Basically, is what that comes down to. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both those.
All right. Well, thank you. Another question: is there a minimum internet speed needed to work remotely?
We'll say yes. And the reason I say yes is because it depends on who is doing what. So if, for example, you have DSL, whether that's Verizon or CenturyLink, it doesn't matter what you do on DSL, it's not going to be fast enough. DSL is just too slow at this point. For the most part, it depends on how many people are in the house, depends on how many people are watching YouTube at the same time, how many people are streaming Netflix in 4K. They all have different bandwidth requirements. Thankfully, a lot of the providers around here have such high bandwidth packages that you're basically not going to notice it. There was at one point, because I had some failing equipment, I would be on my computer and I could tell the moment my wife started watching Netflix because my signal would degrade. Once I fixed my equipment, that problem went away. But that was I could literally tell the minute she started up Netflix, because I would notice my connection,
Right.
getting blurry.
Okay. So. Another question: my work phone line and work email gets transferred to my personal cell phone. Mm-hmm. Is there any security issue with doing this?
So it depends on company policy. So for example, if you hook up your personal cell phone to, say, Office 365 or Gmail, which are the two big platforms that we use for email, the administrator does have the ability to wipe the phone remotely. So that's up to you as to whether you want the company to have the ability to wipe your phone. That's if you're just transferring the phone call, like say your work phone number just straight up forwards to your cell phone, then there's nothing to be concerned about other than the business misses out on those analytics. Because as soon as that phone call gets forwarded to the cell phone, you lose all visibility into what actually happened, how long the phone call lasted, what was the end result. So from a business standpoint, I wouldn't necessarily like that.
Okay.
From a security standpoint, for the end user, you're not going to notice.
All right. Do any of my other colleagues have any questions?
Do you guys work? I was going to say, do you guys work remotely? What's been your experience with?
I have since COVID hit, and actually I started working remotely even before COVID. As a there's only a few of us in Southwest Virginia from my organization, so COVID did not hurt me too much. But one of my saving graces is that my original internet carrier was the maximum upload that I had was like 0.8. Oh. And my download was like 0.9, I mean 9. DSL. And I had a neighbor do some upgrades, and I actually paid another carrier to come into my area. So now I have Comcast and have high speed. So that was my saving grace. Unfortunately, others I know in the area have not had that, but that has been key. But there are sometimes glitches. You can tell when there's a lot of people in the area that are on and the times of days. And if there's someone else here visiting and they're on the internet, I have to say, slack off if I'm doing like now a webinar, Zoom meeting, that type of thing. But overall, it's been great. And it matters how IT sets it up at the beginning. That's going to be your saving grace. But Jonathan, one of the questions I had for you is, can you share a couple of examples of something gone bad for either the employer or the employee in getting this going?
So if you like, we've had this happen to several clients. They will set up remote desktop, for example, and it's great and everything's going well. And then we'll find out the hard way that someone has a really weak password. And the reason we find that out is because someone breaks into the server and puts ransomware on it. So that's a serious problem. And so that's why on some cases we've taken the extra step of having the VPN connection happen first and then remote desktop, because that takes away the ability for someone to directly attack the remote desktop server. But it's, because if you put a server out there on the internet, it doesn't matter if it's some non-standard port, it's going to be attacked all day long. Like that's just how it is. There's people that spend 24 hours a day scanning the internet to find servers like that, and then they just attack it all day long. So that's a pretty serious problem. We've had to recover from backup. One client in particular, this is the I told you so moment. He had about half his employees logging in as him, and his password was 3333. His password was 4 3s. That was his password, and that's how everyone was logging in remotely. And
is he still there?
Oh, he's the owner of the company. He did not want to change his password. I kept telling him, you need to change your password. This is not good. You need to have everyone with their own unique login. And it wasn't until he got hacked that he finally let me change his password for him.
So Jonathan, we have one more question. It says, do you have a sense of how secure companies have been transitioning to home-based work during the pandemic? I'm curious how confident I need to feel when doing business with their staff or sitting in their homes, or maybe how many company failures do you know about?
That's a great question. The issue is that you don't know how they're set up. Like that's just one example I should say is a client that we picked up. They have hundreds of employees working remotely doing call center work, and they're dealing with confidential information. And in that particular case, they have just reams of paper of policies that you have to sign and agree to. and I had to go through something like 80 documents of training to be able to get on the account, kind of deal. And so in that, and their computers are very, very tightly locked down. So in that particular case, they have spent the money and gone through the effort to make sure that client information is secured and that the employees can work from home consistently and safely. And the only reason I know that is because I've dealt with all the policy to be able to do their IT support. But if I was just calling up, say, Comcast, I don't know. I would hope that a company of that size has got those same policies in place, and that they're, if they've got staff working from home, hopefully they're working on Comcast equipment. You really have no way of knowing unless you ask people there. Like there's just no way to know. You're muted, Becky. There we go. You were just muted. I didn't hear the question. Or
Sorry. So that is all the questions that I see that have come in. So I will turn it back over to Sandy.
Well, Jonathan, as usual, you did an outstanding job, and I'm always learning something. So I know it's of value to me, and I'm sure it is to all our viewers. Just want to remind folks that this video will be uploaded, and I'll be sharing with Jonathan, or I'll be sharing Jonathan's slides with you, and you can find the video up on VCC's, Virginia Community Capital's Facebook and YouTube channels. And when I upload it to YouTube, I'll just go ahead and attach the link directly. And if you found value in this, the key is sharing with others that can also gain, that are looking at this. So we encourage you to please share with other colleagues and business associates and business owners that can benefit from this program. So just want to do a plug for the next one on May the 13th. That will be disaster recovery and business continuity, on-site versus off-site. And Jonathan will again be presenting that. So I hope you will join us and let someone else know about these programs sessions. So team, thanks so much for your support. It's good to see you. And Jonathan, as always, hats off to you. You do an outstanding job. So thank you for donating your time. It's worth saying that you are running a business, but you're donating your time to put this together for us and to lead this. So we thank you very much. So I hope everyone has a great day, and see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.